Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. Today we are going to be taking a look at how to quickly clean up a 3D photogrammetry scan in Maya for use in a wide variety of projects. When you create a photogrammetry scan of a real-life object, it will typically be a very high poly mesh that's very demanding on Maya or whatever software it's being rendered in. So we're going to make a low poly copy of this 3D scan and then transfer the details over as a normal map, which will be much more efficient. This is by no means going to be the most in-depth overview of cleaning up a 3D scan, but rather it's a quick and easy introduction to the process. Likewise, I'm using a pretty quick and easy scan of a lemon, which I captured using the Reality Scan app from Epic Games, which is geared towards quick and user-friendly photogrammetry. You may notice there's a few problems with this model, one being that the shadows are baked into the textures, and the other being that there's a hole in the bottom of the lemon. These are a couple of drawbacks to the way I captured the scan. But again, we're going for easy introduction and not getting the perfect photogrammetry model. So after scanning the lemon with my phone and following the steps in the application to send the model to myself, I was able to download this folder with 3 files in it. A GLB file which contains the model itself, a diffuse map which is just the color of the lemon, and a normal map which affects how light bounces off of the lemon to give it a greater sense of detail. Now, normally we can't just open a GLB file with Maya, so instead we're going to go ahead and open it in Blender so that we can export it into a FBX file, which Maya can read. So with Blender open, I'm going to just select everything in the default scene and delete it. And then I'm going to go up to File, Import, and I'm going to go down here to GLTF 2.0. And you can see that our .glb is one of the files that this opens. After I click that, I'm going to navigate to my lemon scan folder and open the model.glb file. All right, and if I press period on the number pad on my keyboard, I can zoom in directly on that lemon. If I turn on viewport shading, I can see the textures applied to it as well. So once I've confirmed that it looks all good in Blender, I'm going to select my lemon, go to File, Export, FBX. And I'm going to navigate to a Maya project folder that I've made for this. And I'm going to go into Scenes, give this a new name, lemon scan.fbx. And then on the right-hand side here, I want to make sure that selected objects is checked. And just double checking to make sure I have it selected. I can see by the orange border and by the highlighting here in the outliner that it is. And then I'll just hit Export FBX. Then from there, I can close Blender. I don't need to save that file. And then I'm going to open up my Maya project folder and just double check that that FBX is in there, which it is. Great, so now I can open this in Maya. Okay, once I'm in Maya and I've set my project to the lemon project, I'm going to go to File, Import, and select my lemon. Now I have to zoom out a bit to find it, but my lemon is right here. For whatever reason, the pivot point for this lemon is way off center, so we will fix that. You'll also notice if you have this selected that there are a lot of polygons in this mesh. In fact, there's over 69,000 faces in this mesh, and that is a lot more than we need. So the main thing we're going to be doing today is re-topologizing, where we're going to build a new lower resolution, lower poly mesh on top of the existing one, and then transfer the textures for the super high density model over to the low poly model. Also, something to note, there's a hole in the bottom of my model here. That is an artifact from the way that I took this scan, where the lemon was resting on an object. And as I was defining the boundaries of this object, I cropped out the very bottom of it where it was making contact with that object, just to make sure that we're getting the lemon and only the lemon in the model. But we're going to want to patch that over with just a little bit of geometry. We're not going to bother with texturing the hole here because this is supposed to be a quick exercise, but that is something you could address more thoroughly down the line if you wanted to patch that sort of thing. But before anything else, I want to center the pivot of this lemon into the middle of the model, and I want to move this to the center of my grid. So to center the pivot, all I need to do is press this button right here in the poly modeling shelf. And when I do that, it centers the pivot right into the middle. Next thing I want to do is I'm going to manually move this lemon to the center of the grid. So to do that, I'm going to hold the X key to turn on Snap to Grid. This can also be toggled on and off by pressing the leftmost magnet button up here just under the menu bar. With Snap to Grid on, my model will move in increments equal to the grid size. Now let's press F to center my view on the lemon, and I can just kind of eyeball it right there. And there we go. Finally, with my model in the center of the grid, we want to make sure that this is the default position for the lemon. So I'm going to go to the channel box, and I can see that it is, definitely not using the center of the grid as the default position. So all I need to do is hit freeze transformations right there. And now the model is permanently set in the center of my scene. And then real quick, I'm going to press the textures visibility button above my viewport just to check and make sure that the textures made it over from Blender. Looks like everything carried over just fine, so I'll turn off texture visibility again for the time being. Next thing we need to do is set this model so that we can place new geometry on top of it. And to do that, we need to make this model live. Now, what that means is basically it is be set as a snapping target, so to speak. Similar to the way that we just moved the lemon using Snap to Grid, we are going to make the lemon live so that any new vertices that we place or move will snap to the live surface. So to do that, all I need to do is select the lemon, and then I'm going to go up here and select the rightmost magnet button. I'm just going to click that, and now the lemon is live, and I can no longer select it from the viewport. And when I look at it in the outliner, the text has turned green, and we can see the name of the model up here right next to the live surface magnet. So now, say if I were to create a cube and then try to move that, see, it's now sliding along the surface of this lemon. With the lemon now set to live, we can then go ahead and start to place geometry on top of this to recreate the lemon at a lower resolution. And to do that, I'm going to go to the modeling toolkit, and I'm going to select Quad Draw. And then with the Quad Draw tool, I can start placing vertices on top of this lemon. So I just tap in 4 places, we can see these green dots appearing. These are going to be the vertices of my polygons. And then with Shift held and my mouse hovering between those points, it shows me where a new polygon is going to be created. And all I need to do to confirm it is to click. To keep adding polygons, I can just place 2 more points and then hold Shift between them and the existing polygon and click, and it creates another polygon. Same thing, 2 more points, hold Shift, click, creates another one. Then if I wanted to do several in quick succession, I could lay out the vertices like this and hold Shift and just go down the line. I can also add polygons by holding the Tab key and then clicking and dragging out from one of these lines to extrude more polygons. And the way that these extrude depend on the settings you have here in the modeling toolkit. So under extend, right now I have it set to loop. So it'll extend the edge loop when I extrude it like this. Whereas if I set this to edge, it'll only extrude a single edge. Or if I set this to border, it will extrude from the entire border of this whole set of polygons like this. Another way to add polygons in quick succession is to hold Tab and move the mouse to somewhere away from any existing polygons. And you'll see there's a square dragging behind my mouse. If I just click and hold and drag my mouse, it'll just lay down polygons in a line like this. If I want to make the size of these polygons larger or smaller, all I need to do is hold tab and then hold down the middle mouse button and then drag left or right. And that'll give me larger or smaller polygons. If I want to delete polygons in this mode, all I have to do is hold Shift and Control at the same time, and then just tap each polygon. Whatever you're going to be deleting will turn yellow when you hover over it. And this applies to more than just whole polygons. You can also delete individual edges as well, or whole edge loops. You can also divide polygons by holding just the Control key and then clicking. That will add edge loops back in. Now, maybe you have some edge loops that are too close together like this. You can smooth out this surface by holding the Shift key to relax the vertices. And this will try to make everything as even in size as possible when you go over them. And if you want to move any specific components like the vertices or faces, just click and drag them without holding any other keys. And that is the basics of the Quad Draw tool. Now, our goal here with this lemon is to reduce the number of polygons to the point that it can be used in say, an animated project and not slow down the system too much because it's not trying to render 69,000 polygons, but it's still dense enough that it maintains a lot of that detail from the original lemon. We're going to do a trick once this is done to transfer a lot of this detail over to the low poly model as a normal map. So you don't need to worry too much about preserving every last detail because some of that is going to be preserved in the normal map. So before I jump into that, I'm going to go ahead and delete what's done here. And all I need to do that is go over to Poly Surface 1 in the outliner and hit the delete key. And it'll delete that new model we made. But I'm still in Quad Draw, so I can just make a new one by placing down more vertices. And for this lemon, I'm going to try and go around in kind of a circle around this point here where the stem was growing. And it's really ideal to work with very, very large polygons because we can always make it more detailed later on. Remember, when modeling, we want to maintain quads as much as possible. That means polygons with 4 sides. So it may take some work to avoid creating triangles or n-gons. For example, right here, I have a spot where I'm going to be putting a triangle here if I don't do anything to change the surrounding geometry. So I'm going to actually delete that face and just add another edge loop here. So I have quads still. Now with this, I'm going to go ahead and switch to border so I can easily extrude out this way. Start to wrap the whole lemon. Although I do reach a problem here with the hole in the middle of my geometry. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and delete those faces for now. I'm going to manually do this part myself. These polygons are definitely way too wide right now. So I'll be dealing with that later. But for now, I kind of want to get the surface covered. Yeah, there we go. And then I can come back and extrude the border again. Careful as you start to extrude a border, as it starts to get closer together, you'll start having these spots where it overlaps. So be sure to go back in and relax those vertices. And at a certain point, when things start coming together, you'll start having to be really careful about how you set up this geometry, and you might need to do a little trial and error before you come up with the solution to completely close off this edge of the model, ideally without any triangles. Now that I've covered the surface in new polygons, I'm going to go ahead and use the relax tool to even all of these out. And then I'm going to add some edge loops right here and here to give this model a little more detail. While the goal is to make this a low poly model, I don't want to make it so low poly that it looks blocky. And then I'm just finishing it off with the relax tool again and moving some of these vertices manually so that all of these polygons look relatively even and similar in size. There's no one-size-fits-all solution to retopology, and there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all density for how many polygons you need for this. It will always depend on what the model's being used for. A good rule of thumb, though, is that if the object is going to be moving, and especially if it is a character rig, which is going to need to deform in one way or another, you will want to have fewer polygons, because the more polygons your model has, the more processing power it will take from your computer to work with the model when you're animating it. Now that I've covered the entire model with new geometry, I want to go back and fill in the hole in the bottom of the mesh that I cut out when I captured this with Reality Scan. So the first thing I need to do is exit quad draw mode by pressing Q to go to my selection mode. And you can tell I'm in selection mode now because the cursor is highlighted here in the top left next to my outliner. Then I'm going to hold right click and go to object mode. And when I switch to object mode, I can tell that my low poly mesh is the object that's selected because poly surface 1 is highlighted, and my low poly mesh has green lines now. So with that selected, I'm going to press this button to isolate that selection so we can just look at the low poly model. Now the next thing I need to do is turn off the snapping to the high poly geometry. So I'm going to go up here to the magnet on the right of the row of magnets, and I'm just going to click that to turn off Make Live. That's a really important step because any new vertices that I try to place inside of this hole will instead snap to the invisible high poly lemon either to the sides of the hole or to the inside of it somewhere. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to double click this edge to select the entire edge loop going around the hole. And then with those edges selected, I'm going to go to Mesh, Fill Hole, and that fills in the space with one big polygon. Now the problem is this polygon has more than 4 sides, making it an n-gon. So we want to fix that by dividing the polygon into smaller shapes. So then I'm going to go over here to multi-cut. I'm going to select from here to here. And then I press enter to confirm the division and place an edge. And then I repeat that a few more times until I've completely divided the face into quads with 4 sides each. Next, I want to adjust the vertices so that they line up with the curvature of the rest of the model. So just by eyeballing it, I'm going to select these 2 vertices here. I'm just going to move them down until it looks like it is consistent with the rest of the shape of the lemon. Next things next. I'm noticing that there is a lot of inconsistency as far as soft and hard shading for these edges. So I just want to make sure that this whole object is using smooth shading. So to do that, I'm going to select the object. I'm going to hold Shift and right click. I'm going to go to Soften Edges, Soften Edge. And now that surface looks a lot smoother. And now before I forget, I'm going to go ahead and rename each of these models. So I'm going to name them Lemon Retopo and Lemon High Poly. Next, we want to UV map the low poly model so that we can project the details of the high poly model onto the low poly version. So making sure I'm in the modeling menus, I'm going to go to UV editor. And because I just made the low poly version, the UVs are kind of a mess right now. So I'm going to go over here to create and just hit automatic to give us a fresh start. And then from here, I'm going to want to manually UV map this by sewing the edges all together and then cutting new seams. So to do that, I'm going to switch to edge mode and select all of these edges. And then over here on the right, I'm just going to hit sew so that I can sew all the edges together and I don't have any random seams that I can miss. And I'm just going to go from here all the way to here to have a seam right down the middle. Cut that. And then I'm going to make a cut from here to here. And I'll make a couple more cuts on each of these sides. And our goal here is to balance having as few seams as possible while still having enough seams that allow the model to unfold flat in the UV editor and have as little distortion as possible. So I'm going to go down here to unfold. And then I'm going to press the unfold button to untangle this mess and have all the UVs lay out flat in the editor. And I think it looks okay right now, but just to be sure, we can turn on the checkerboard pattern here. And I'm going to make this UV shell bigger. So it takes up the whole space. Over here, I'm going to look for any distortions. And it looks pretty dense here. So I'm going to extend these seams and keep playing with it for a little while until I feel like I found an appropriate balance between the number of seams and having as little distortion as possible. All right. Now with my lemon UV mapped, I'm ready to project the high poly onto the low poly. So to do that, I'm going to first turn off isolate selection so that I can see both models. So I'll need to refer to both of them as I'm doing this. And then up here, I am currently set to the modeling menus, but I'm going to go ahead and switch to the rendering menus because I need to access lighting/shading. So I'm going to open up that menu. I'm going to go down here to transfer maps. And what this does is allow me to transfer the details of the high poly model as a normal map onto the low poly version, and to project the diffuse map from the high poly model onto the low poly model as well. So the first thing I need to do is I need to add the low poly mesh to the target meshes. So I'm going to select the retopo and I'm going to press add selected. And then I'll open up the tab labeled source meshes and I'll select the high poly mesh and then I'll press add selected to make the high poly lemon my source mesh. Now, next to the low poly lemon in target meshes, there's a drop-down labeled display, which lets us turn on the visibility for the model's envelope, which is the search volume of the transfer map generation operation. And if I just turn up the search envelope percentage a little bit, I'll see that the envelope expands to contain the entire high poly model. This is important to do to make sure that the entire high poly model gets captured in the maps transfer. Next, I'm going to select which maps I want to output in this transfer, the first of which will be a normal map. And what that means is when I bake this transfer, it's going to use the details of the high poly model to create a normal map of said detail for the low poly model. That normal map will cause light to bounce off of the surface of that low poly model as if it were the high poly one, thereby giving the illusion of all sorts of little details like bumps and crevices, which are not actually built into the geometry. By faking these details with a normal map, the low poly model will be much more resource efficient, while still looking nearly as detailed as the original model. The other map I want to transfer is the diffuse map, which is quite simply the colors from the original high poly model. Because the UV maps are different between the high and low poly models, I need to bake the diffuse for the low poly model so that I'll have a texture which looks the same on the new low poly model with the new UVs. So once I've clicked the buttons for normal and diffuse maps, I want to go down and change a couple of settings for each of these. First of all, I want to make sure that each of these maps is being outputted as a JPEG, or a PNG would work fine as well. You'll also want to change the names for each of these maps to something more recognizable other than their default names. So I've named these Lemon Normals and Lemon Diffuse Color respectively. And then below the settings for each individual map, I'm going to uncheck Connect Maps to Shader because I want to set up the material for this lemon manually. Finally, something I forgot to do on my first bake of these maps is under Maya Common Output, I need to increase the map width and height, and I need to increase the sample quality. The width and height I'm going to increase to is 496 pixels, which means I will now be baking 4K textures, and I'll be setting the sampling quality to high to get the best possible image quality. This resolution and sampling quality may be excessive as it'll lead to very long bake time, but if time is not of the essence, then it may be worth it for you. And now with all of those settings in place, I'm going to press Bake and Close to begin the transfer process. For me, this took about 16 minutes to complete with these settings, but your times may vary depending on the machine you're working on. With the maps baked, we can go ahead and make a new material for the low poly mesh. So I'm going to move aside the high poly lemon, and then I'm going to open the hypershade by pressing this blue circle button up here. So with the retoppled lemon selected, I'm going to hold right click. I'm going to go down to Assign New Material. I'm going to go ahead and make that a AI standard surface. Not to be confused with Maya's default standard surface, I want to go to the Arnold category and select AI standard surface because I want to render this lemon with the Arnold render engine. And then I want to give this material a name, so I'm just going to call it M_lemon. And then down here under the base tab, I want to set the color to the diffuse map I just made. So I'm going to click this black and white button next to color, and then in the window that appears, I'm going to select File. And it makes a node right here, and under this node, I'm just going to go to Image Name, and that opens up the source images folder for me to select my maps from. However, the maps didn't get saved to the source images folder, so there's nothing for me to select right now. That is because when we are rendering any images in Maya, when it's making an output, those images go to the images folder and not the source images folder, where we would expect to find images that we will be using in Maya. So all we need to do is navigate to the images folder in the File Explorer, select the two images, and then press Ctrl and X together to cut the images, and put them in the source images folder by pressing Ctrl and V to paste them in the folder. And now those maps will be selectable from the source images folder. It's important that we put those images in the source images folder all the time because source images is where Maya always looks for things that it's going to use for materials and any image files that it's using as an input. With that out of the way, I'm going to select Lemon Diffuse Color and open it. And then I'm going to repeat the process for the normal map. So I'm going to scroll down here to the Geometry section, and I'm going to press the button next to Bump Mapping. And like before, I'm going to select the File node. And this creates a Bump 2D node between the file and the rest of the material. And then within the Bump 2D node, I'm going to set Use As to Tangent Space Normals. And then under File, I'm going to select our new normal map. And there we go. I've now got both of those maps working on the low poly lemon. There's still a bit of work to be done, but I'm nearly there. You probably noticed that the high poly lemon looks a lot brighter than the low poly one, but that's mainly due to differences in how they're being rendered in the viewport because the high poly lemon is using a Phong shader, while the low poly lemon is using an AI standard surface shader. When I render this in Arnold, though, they should look very similar. So I'm going to start rendering these with Arnold to see how they look. To actually see these in Arnold, though, I'm going to need a light source. So I'm going to add a sky sphere from the Arnold shelf. And what that is a big sphere that'll just enclose my whole scene, and it'll project light inwards from all angles. And then to start a render, I'm just going to go up to the Arnold menu and select Render. And sure enough, the two look a lot more similar when rendered in Arnold. However, you may notice that the light seems to be reflecting off of the low poly lemon in a strange way. This is because I didn't correctly set the color space of the normal map, so Arnold is causing the light to bounce off of it in weird ways. The telltale sign of this is the weird seams in the light reflections going along the bottom of the lemon where my UV seams are. So the way to fix this is to go back into my material and go to the color space for the file of my normal map, And then I'm going to open up this dropdown and navigate to Utility and select Raw. And then once that updates in the render, it looks a lot more natural. The new lemon is a lot shinier than the original though. So I'm going to navigate back to the main node of my material, and I'm going to find the roughness, and I'm just going to raise that to 0.5. And now that looks a lot closer to the original lemon. And finally, I'm seeing a lot of these sort of jagged edges that are really standing out. So all I need to do to really get rid of that is press 3 with the low poly lemon selected to turn on smooth preview. And that just rounds out all of those jagged edges without changing the geometry itself. And now that's looking pretty good. Finally, we want to take our new low poly lemon and we want to export as an FBX with our textures packaged in and everything so that we can import it into other programs or share it around as just a single file. So with the low poly lemon selected, I'm going to go to File, Export Selection, and I'm just going to name this lemon underscore low poly. And this is very important on the right side. I'm going to expand that. You want to go down here to embedded media and make sure embed media is checked. This will make sure that all of the textures that you just made, like the diffuse of the normal map, will be baked into the FBX, so it doesn't need to reference external files. So with that, I'm going to export selection. And now to test this out, I'm going to create a new scene, hit save. I'm going to import lemon low poly FBX. And it doesn't look like much until we turn on the textures, and there's our lemon. But see, once again, here we have that problem with the normal maps coming in strangely. But all I need to do is go back into the hypershade and repeat those steps to set the normal map's color space back to raw. And there we go. That looks much better. So that's how you clean up a photogrammetry scan as a low poly model. With that, I wish you the best of luck, and I hope you have a good day.